Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be venturing into the world of the supernatural. Not everything can be explained, and it is those stories that we are delving into tonight. I hope you're ready, because things are going to get creepy. So get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. In spite of the fact that I have had several personal paranormal experiences, my mum has never been a believer. I think that might be changing though. My mum and stepdad stayed in a hotel in Eureka Springs. There was a couple in the very next room to them, and they were fighting all night long. My mum said it would get so bad they would almost call the front desk, when it would just settle down again. They said it was very unnerving listening to the couple fight, with the woman crying and the man yelling. It woke them up several times. The next morning as they left, the door to that room was open, and the room was completely made up, with no personal belongings or anything. They figured that the couple had left earlier that morning, and as they checked out at the front desk, my mum mentioned to the clerk that they had almost called, because the couple in the room had fought so much the night before. You can probably see where this is going, but they were told that no one had stayed in that room. Also, they were told later that a man had murdered his wife in that hotel. Another story. One of my children has always been very sensitive to things. He picks up on the emotions of others very easily and is extremely empathetic. He was 6 years old when we moved into a house that had been built in the 1940s. The house had one owner, the couple who built the house, and they lived in it until they died, and then we bought the house from their kids. Obviously, we didn't tell our young children that the previous owners had died. During the course of buying the house, we met the two daughters, and they never mentioned another sister. But they mentioned at one point that 3 girls had shared the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. When we moved in, we took the smaller bedroom and gave what had been the master bedroom to our 2 little boys. Right after we moved in, I was in the basement with the boys when my older son, the sensitive one, kind of yelped and ran out from behind the staircase and said, "There's a little girl back there." I figured that he had seen a shadow vaguely shaped like someone, but asked him what she looked like, and he said, "She has short blonde hair like Katie, and she has a dress with pink and yellow flowers, and she has bare feet, or was maybe wearing flip-flops." Way too much detail to not actually have seen something. He said, "I looked at her for a long time," and then he paused for about 8 to 10 seconds, and then I looked away, and when I looked back she was gone. He said it was about 8 to 10 seconds, and it doesn't sound like a long time, but it's a good long look when you really time it out. He was freaked out, and I tried to appear calm as we all noped our way back upstairs. The boys wouldn't go back into the basement for the remaining 5 years that we lived there, and insisted we keep the door at the top of the stair closed. Of course, I immediately started thinking about the 3rd daughter that we didn't meet, and no one talked about it. There were also incidences where the lights in the kitchen would randomly go on and off. There seemed to be no pattern. We could be in the kitchen or not, and the light would go off, and then, a while later, come back on. We knew the house had been partially rewired at some point, but were unsure about the kitchen. Concerned about a fire hazard from old wiring, we had an electrician check it out. He said the kitchen had been rewired at some point, but was still pretty old, but he didn't see any problem or hazards. Still, the light turned off and on randomly. We put up with it for a while, but still worried about a fire. And finally, we decided to just rewire the whole light. The switch was in an inconvenient place, so we had all the wiring to the light redone. The light still went on and off randomly, but at that point we felt that we had done all that we could. On another occasion, my sensitive son told us at different times that he had seen an old man and an old woman. He had a lot of detail, just like with the little girl. The old man in a suit with old-looking shoes, and my son said he was smoking one of those kind of cigarettes that you make yourself that's skinnier at the ends. We wonder where our son had learned about joints, but it turned out he was trying to describe a cigar. He said the old man walked into his closet, then disappeared. The old woman he had seen in the hallway, and said that she had a white button-up shirt on and had the sleeves rolled up, and she had pens in the shirt pocket. Many times the house would suddenly start to smell like someone was cooking bacon. It was a very strong smell. We rarely made bacon at the time, and it was way too strong to be a lingering odor anyway. We got to where we would just say, "The old lady is making bacon again," and go on with what we were doing. The only scary thing that happened there was once where my son woke up in the morning and told us that someone had slapped him across the face while he was sleeping. He hadn't come to get us right when it happened, so we couldn't look for redness. Then a couple of weeks later, I was sleeping on my stomach and was woken up by what felt like exactly someone punching me hard right in my butt cheek. My husband hadn't come to bed yet, so when I found I was alone, I went to find my husband, because I was really scared. While I was telling him, I remember my son saying that he had been slapped, and I became damn near hysterical. But I just had surgery and was on medication, and have sleep apnea, so we wrote it off as having to do with all of that. But I swear, it really felt like I got punched. We ended up moving, not because of the ghosts or whatever. The house was a money pit. But after we had our stuff moved out, we were doing some repairs in the house. My brother was helping and had bought his dog, and his dog absolutely refused to go into the boys' bedroom and the basement, even when we were all there. We would try and call him in, but he would just cower on his belly and not move. Oh, and about the third sister. One day, I was out in the yard gardening, and she stopped by. It turned out she lived on the same street, but her and her other sisters had a falling out. She stopped to tell us that the house looked nice, and asked for a cutting of her mum's rosebush. So, I have no idea who the little girl in the basement was. When I was about 14 or 15, my family moved into a seemingly normal, cozy home. in Savannah, Georgia. We were a family of 4, just my parents and older sister and I. It was a really nice place. It was a really nice place at first. We had a generous amount of space throughout the home. There were beautiful hard wood and carpeted floors, and a great backyard. We thought it would be the perfect place to live in, but we were very wrong. We would end up moving out of that house after living there for just a single year. It was quiet at first, nothing out of the ordinary, and it stayed that way for a little while. However, after about 2 or 3 months of living there, strange occurrences and events started happening. They started off as simple as things not being where we left them, to hearing footsteps and knocks in the night, and eventually seeing actual apparitions. Before I tell the next part, it's important that I explain the way that our entertainment room was set up. The room was at the end of the house on the 2nd story. It only had one doorway. So the only way I could get out of that room was by going through that door. The room exits onto a hallway where you can either go left or right. Going right would lead into the kitchen and the rest of the house, while going left would lead into my parents' bedroom. Anyway, there was one night that I will never forget, and it is the night which drove me to set up our family camera to try and record some of these occurrences. It was the summer of 1994, sometime in June. I was up late playing Super Mario World on the SNES in the entertainment room. As I was contently playing my favourite game, I suddenly felt a blast of cold air pass over me, which was weird, as it was just the beginning of summer, and our AC was not the best in that house. I looked up from the TV to see that the door was fully open, when I remembered having shut it most of the way prior to getting on the gaming console. That sent shivers down my spine, but I mustered up the strength to go over to the door and shut it all the way this time. After shutting the door, I returned to the console to resume gaming, but it wasn't until about 5 minutes after that I started hearing a rattle coming from the door. I looked over immediately to see the door fling open. I was paralyzed with fear. The controller dropped out my hands. I froze for a solid 10 minutes, fearing that someone or something with ill intent would come through it. After about 15 minutes of nothing else happening, I summed up all my remaining courage and crept to the doorway to check it out. When I got to the doorway, I could hear a faint footstep coming from across the house. My heartbeat started racing, my breath narrowing, but I decided to peek out of the doorway to see if it was one of my parents, or maybe my older sister playing a cruel trick on me. But no, what I saw was far worse. Looking to the right of the hallway, I saw a black mass, just hovering at the end, and then it started making its way towards me. I let out a loud scream and bolted left to get to my parents' room. I remember bursting through their door, waking them up and shouting about what I had just seen. My mother sprang up and looked perturbed, while my father grumbled, and eventually sat up to listen what I was trying to say. I looked behind me, and there was nothing there anymore, thankfully. My mother explained to me that she had also been experiencing weird occurrences and had an overall off-put feeling about the house. My dad was somewhat of a skeptic, but didn't disbelieve me. After that night, I was dedicated to capturing events like this on tape. I set up our family camera in areas around the house that felt the weirdest or where previous occurrences had happened. It took me a while before I finally captured something. Allow me to preface. I am a 32-year-old female, and I have been working in real estate for the last 9 years. It's a job that I had been looking forward to for a long time, and was very glad that with the connections my father had, I was able to get into a business very quickly. So, on to the story. There was a house in the town I live in that had someone die in it. I wasn't very familiar with this person, nor did I really care much, to be honest. People come and go all the time. What can you do? So, that house went on the market. I wasn't the person dealing with that house. It was someone else. And it was quickly snapped up at a reasonable price by a young couple. But about 5 years later, that house came up on the market again. This time round, I was the one who was going to be dealing with it. And I had a few potential calls of people who were interested in buying the home. Now, the home itself was very, very compact, if you can call it that. It was a 1-bedroom, 1 kitchen, 1 bathroom kind of deal. It was a house, but it wasn't very big. I'd say it would be enough for 2 people, and that would be it. It would be the kind of home that you'd move into if you just started living by yourself. It was a bit of an awkward house, to be honest, but it was there to be sold, and I needed to do my job. I had a few calls. It was a Wednesday, and all manner of people were arranging slot after slot to have a house viewing. It worked out quite nicely for me. So I arrived about 40 minutes earlier than my first slot in order to have a good look at the house, because I'd been quite busy those last few weeks and hadn't actually got a chance to see it beforehand. I really needed to know what I was talking about, but I had all the paperwork, so I already had a good idea of what it was going to be. Once you've sold one house, you've sold them all. At least when you've got a fair amount of experience anyway. So there I am, looking around and having a peek through the house, going through my little pamphlet and just making sure that all the right boxes are ticked and there's no misinformation that will trip me up when trying to make a sale. I'm feeling pretty good about this, when all of a sudden, I think I hear something. I go to the front door, but before I reach it, coming round the corner, is a woman. The woman looks to be in her mid-40s or early 50s. She was wearing a rather odd pink and green floral dress, and quite interestingly, wasn't wearing shoes. I look up and down at her and think, my God, she's early, and assumed that she'd taken her shoes off before entering the house. So I try and greet her as politely as possible. Oh, hi. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting you for another 20 minutes. Oh, and there was no need to take your shoes off. The woman kept on walking, and I was a little bit confused, but tried to catch up with her. "Oh, I see you're very eager to look at the house. It's certainly one of a kind, perfect for someone single, or perhaps a couple," I say, just as I'm rounding the corner. I look around, and she's not there. I'm getting quite confused now. What? So I start calling out, "Hello, ma'am?" The house was miniature. There was literally nowhere for her to go. Seriously. I think maybe through some kind of miscommunication in my eyes, she may have slipped to the bathroom. I try and convince myself of something that I know is complete horseshit. But still, I go and check. I take about 6 steps before I'm at the door, which just swings open when I put my hand on it. And lo and behold, nobody is in there. This is the point where I start freaking out. I look in a frantic pace around the house, making sure that she hasn't hidden in a cupboard or something, or maybe behind the sofa. But alas, she isn't here. I look down at my watch and realize that I only have a few minutes left now before my actual clients arrive. I try and regain my composure before their arrival. And when they get there, I think I did my best in trying to convince them that the house was worth getting. But the woman did ask me twice if I was okay. Honestly, I was a bit shaken up at the start, but once I got into the flow of things, I tried to put that in the back of my mind. I managed to get on with the rest of my day just fine, and in the evening was speaking to my boyfriend about what I had seen. He said that his father actually knew someone who knew the person who used to live in that house, as his dad had lived in the town a long time. So he made a few calls, and after about 40 minutes, they managed to find out that the woman who used to live there killed herself. Apparently, she hung herself in her bedroom. What a delightful thought. That really freaked me out. They tried to get a picture of her. The death was a while ago, but not that long ago. And there were some pictures on a mutual friend's Facebook of her and this other lady. Sure enough, it was her. At least I think it was. I never got a good full-on view. It was more only half of her, but the part of her face that I did see looked uncannily familiar. Those little eyes, white skin, and that extremely long blonde hair, just kind of flowing to her sides. It's something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. My boyfriend believed me, but I didn't want to push it any further and see if other people would believe me too. No one ended up buying the house. Maybe they got weird vibes from it. I don't know. But after about 3 months, I ended up passing that job along to another colleague because I was moved to another branch out of state. I don't really know who she was or why she killed herself. I just hope that her spirit finds peace. Better than being in that small house anyway. My parents divorced in 2008. When I was 15 or so, my mother had gotten with a thing. Yes, thing. That was younger than my oldest brother. This thing was caught up in pills and drinking, so naturally I didn't like him. My mother promptly moved in with him after she cheated and divorced my father. I remember countless nights of loss of sleep, because she would want to drive to his house at 3 a.m. on a school night, or get his beer or drugs to him. But I digress. My mother was practically a whore for this man. She allowed him to abuse her and I in more ways than one. I recall several nights of being chased around with a metal baseball bat, shotguns, knives, and even being locked outside like a dog, and going to school in my pajamas the next day. Why didn't we call the police, you ask? Simple. We lived in the country. He broke our phones or would hide them from us. He was a real asshole. He scared away friends, relatives, and neighbors. I was told that my father wanted nothing to do with me. That's why he never called or visited. Little did I know that he did call and visit, but 14-year-old me was locked up in the closet, and would be locked up in that closet sometimes for an entire weekend, with no food, water, and would have to urinate on myself from just waiting. Now, given all this information, I was quite lonely. I only communicated to my friends at school, and every time I brought up how abusive my stepfather and mother were, the school investigated. Unfortunately for me, they always put on this perfect family picture, invited them to our perfect home. My mother and stepfather acted like a great family from one of those 50s sitcoms. They told me that I shouldn't tell lies on my wonderful parents. I remember one night, after freezing in my room because I wasn't allowed to have heat on as punishment during the winter, I went into the attic after getting my door open. My door was always barricaded to keep me from roaming at night, even if it were to get a drink of water. I tried it once and had the glass broken in my face that I had just been drinking out of. So why try again? I was freezing, I was shivering, and it had been nearly 0 degrees Fahrenheit at the time. I felt the warmth of the living room where my stepfather had passed out in his chair, and I tiptoed through the dark to the attic door and lowered it. It squeaked and I froze solid. I was scared to death that he would wake up and catch me. I wanted to cry, but I was so cold, and I finally unfolded the stairs and went up. The attic was small but dark, and I turned on the light and was just about to move from the steps when the steps below me folded up and slammed against the attic floor. It scared me, not so much the sound, but the fact that I may be stuck up there as punishment because my stepfather was probably awake. No telling what would happen when I got down. Would it be metal bats, being locked outside, or child's play to him, hiding beside my bed, waiting for me to sleep so that he could touch me? I obviously didn't sleep well at night. No one believed me on the touching, him waiting for night so that he could get under my bed. I will never wear those red kitty pajamas again. Anyway, back to the attic. I found the heater and was coming back to the steps and was trying to get them unfolded again when I felt what felt like a hair touching my shoulder and cheeks. Now I had short hair to keep my father from using it to grab me. Now I had short hair and had it to keep my stepfather from using it to grab me. I loved long hair, but didn't have it at this point. Where was this feeling coming from? I started to look around when I saw this dark flowing mass, like hair almost, wrapping around me. The light bulb blew, darkening the entire attic. I tried to scream, but couldn't. I couldn't make a sound. The mass wrapped itself around me, and I felt my heat turn into a block of ice in my chest, and my chest felt frozen. I thought I was dying. Is this how it feels when people die? I started to panic hardcore, but again I couldn't move. I heard the mass whispering, but it sounded like thousands of people whispering at once, so I couldn't make out a single word. Finally, the attic steps flew out from under me, throwing me and the heater to the floor. I laid there awake, paralyzed from fright. What happened? What was that? My mother came around the corner and scolded me. I just laid there. I still couldn't feel where my heart was, and I couldn't feel any beats, and it still felt like there was ice in my chest. I looked up at her. Her scolding, cursing, and slapping didn't faze me. I went to bed without a blanket and no heater. I thought I was cold before, but it was nothing compared to the cold that I felt from the thing. Now, the story doesn't end there. In the coming days, things frequently started to happen. My music box would play without being opened. The dog even refused to stay inside the house anymore. While opening the blinds while home alone, for once, thank God, I started to open one particular blind when I noticed a figure on the other side. My chest felt frozen again, and everything was going blacker inside as I opened the blind. I quickly closed it and all the others that I had opened and locked myself in the bathroom. I couldn't call the police. My stepdad took my phone with him and my mother, and I was alone. Was someone outside? I heard the screen door rattle, and the whisper of 1,000 people began again. I was scared out of my mind. The light in the bathroom started to dim and get bright over and over. I grabbed an emergency flashlight that we had hiding under the cabinet and got into the tub, putting the shower curtain closed. I sat there listening, crying, as I heard laughter. The attic stairs slammed, and the doors in various rooms began slamming open and shut. I closed my eyes and prayed. I prayed so hard, and soon the bathroom door began to shake, and the whispers sounded like they were right in my ear at this point. Just as soon as it started, it all stopped. The light stabilized in the bathroom, and the door opened itself. I prayed even more, thinking someone was in the bathroom with me. I heard the front door open and ran out of the bathroom crying. It was my mother. She had finally come home. Of course, she scolded me, saying that I was a child and shouldn't be left alone for anything. I was just happy to not be alone anymore. I got counselling, and still go to counselling from the abuse I suffered. I have PTSD, anxiety and depression, but I'm happy overall, I suppose. I now have a 2-year-old, and I worry about being like my own mother, but I figure I won't be that way at all, and I know if my daughter goes through anything similar, I'll be there for her, paranormal or otherwise. My counsellor insists I'm no schizophrenic, since I've never displayed any symptoms. So whatever was in that house, whatever attracted to the abuse possibly, was it attracted to the abuse? Possibly. Was it trying to possess me? Maybe. Because I was angry and abused? Was it trying to kill me? Was it trying to be merciful and end me? Who knows? I'm just glad I left. Granted, it was because my mother threw away my 14-year-old self after telling her about the rape. But now, I see it was a godsend. So to the thing in the house. Please stay the hell away from me. When I was about 9, my parents and my grandfather bought a pub in our village. The building was quite old, and used to be stables in the 1900s, and were a couple of 100 years old. I have more than one story about this pub. The two waitresses were smoking outside the pub looking in. My granddad walked past and saw a small, white-haired old lady. He thought she must have thought the entrance was round back. So he went round the back and he couldn't find her. He went to the two girls, and one of them asked if he was okay and said that he looked ill. He asked where the lady went, and they said, "What lady?" thinking that he was joking around. To this day, they still do not believe him. So my mum and dad were working late one night and were just about to close up. They bought themselves a drink and sat at their bar and had a conversation. They said they heard footsteps upstairs and ran and locked the doors as there was no one else about. So, on another occasion, my parents are locking up again at about 2 a.m. They turn the upstairs light off where they think a ghost is. They went downstairs and do the same. Turn left, looked upstairs, and from outside the light was turned on. My father said he didn't want to deal with it, so they left. Now in the pub, there were rooms in the upstairs because soldiers slept there in the wall, and my granddad lived there, and he said on countless occasions he heard something. But the thing that creeped him out the most was the office. In the office was a desk with an old cupboard with files in it. He said whenever he opened the cupboard, it went really cold in a heated room. The grand discovery, though, was that of an ancient fireplace. Maybe it was part of the stables. I guess we'll never know. But it wasn't the fireplace that was so disturbing. It was what was in it. They found, what they told me, was demonic memorabilia. Stuff that satanic worshippers used to summon the devil. One of these included a horseshoe, although I'm not so sure about the relevance of it. They said that they were told to dispose of everything and incinerate it, that it would be best not to deal with the supernatural. This was a few years after they purchased it, and just happened to be doing some renovations to a wall. Obviously they weren't impressed. A few years later, a local taxi driver was in having a pint. He said that he needed to use the restroom. On his way there, he passed by a staff-only door, and he said it was slightly ajar. He never told us what he saw, only that he was seeing a strange light coming from that room. He was taken aback and a little bit confused, so he pushed the door open to look inside. When we asked him what he saw, he said he could never repeat what it was, but that he was absolutely terrified. So terrified, in fact, that he left the pub that very moment and had never stepped foot in it again. He refuses to tell us to this day what it was that he witnessed, and has never come in again since. He always asks his passengers to make their way to outside the pub.